Did you know that German soldiers who captured American uniforms in 1944 initially laughed at them? They held up the simple cotton jackets, the rubber-soled boots, the plain wool trousers, and mocked them as the work of a nation that didn't understand military tradition. "Where are the medals? Where is the tailoring? Where is the pride?" one Wehrmacht officer asked, examining an American field jacket with visible contempt. German uniforms were designed to instill fear and command respect. Sharp lines, polished leather, insignia that announced rank and unit with Prussian precision. American uniforms looked like they'd been designed by factory workers for factory workers. But after a few weeks of winter combat, those same German soldiers were risking court-martial to strip American corpses for their gear. They were trading their iconic jackboots for American rubber-soled boots. They were abandoning their wool greatcoats for American field jackets, and they were learning a painful lesson. In modern warfare, looking good means nothing if you're freezing to death. This is the story of how American military pragmatism defeated German military aesthetics, one warm pair of boots at a time. The story begins in the fall of 1944, as Wehrmacht units in Western Europe encountered American forces in increasing numbers. The initial clashes produced an unexpected bounty: captured American equipment, including uniforms that German soldiers examined with a mixture of curiosity and derision. Obergefreiter Klaus Weber, a veteran infantryman from the Eastern Front who'd been transferred west, picked up an American field jacket from a captured supply depot in September 1944. He held it up to the light, examining the construction. It was made of cotton canvas, treated with some kind of weatherproofing. The colour was a muted olive drab, practical for camouflage but utterly lacking in military bearing. There were no decorative elements, no elaborate buttons, no distinguishing marks of craftsmanship. "Look at this," Weber told his squadmates, laughing. "The Americans dress their soldiers like factory workers. Cotton, not proper wool, just cotton. And look at these pockets. So many pockets. What do they need all these pockets for? Do their soldiers carry sewing kits into battle?" His comrades examined the jacket with similar amusement. The German uniform tradition emphasized appearance as much as function. Their field grey wool uniforms were tailored to fit properly, to present a sharp military silhouette. Their leather jackboots were polished to a shine, their caps and insignia were designed to instill fear in enemies and pride in wearers. A German soldier looked like a soldier, disciplined, professional, part of a military tradition stretching back to Frederick the Great. American soldiers, by contrast, looked like workers. Their uniforms were baggy and formless. Their helmets were simple steel bowls without the distinctive German coal scuttle design. Their boots were brown leather with rubber soles rather than the iconic jackboots. Everything about American military appearance suggested a nation that viewed warfare as a job rather than a calling. Lieutenant Hans Müller, a company commander, examined the American uniform with a more critical eye. He noted the construction details: reinforced elbows, multiple cargo pockets, a design that allowed for layering. "It's not beautiful," he admitted to his sergeant, "but it's designed for function. Look at how the jacket closes, buttons and a zipper, redundancy. And these pockets, they're positioned for easy access even when wearing equipment. Someone thought about this." But Müller's practical observations were drowned out by his men's mockery. They'd been raised in a military culture that valued tradition and appearance. The idea that a uniform should prioritize comfort and utility over presentation was almost offensive. A soldier's uniform should make him look like a warrior, should command respect, should embody military virtues. The American uniform did none of these things. What the Germans didn't know yet was that American uniform design had been developed through extensive testing and feedback from soldiers. While German quartermasters designed uniforms based on tradition and aesthetics, American quartermasters had conducted studies, interviewed soldiers, tested materials in various climates, and iterated designs based on what actually worked in combat conditions. The American Chem 1943 field jacket, which Weber had mocked, was the result of years of development. It was designed to be worn in layers, over a wool shirt and undershirt in cold weather, by itself in warm weather. The cotton canvas shell was treated with water-resistant finish. The multiple pockets were positioned based on what soldiers actually needed to carry and where they needed to access it. The design prioritized mobility, comfort and practicality over appearance. But in September 1944, German soldiers didn't appreciate these features because they didn't need them yet. The weather was still mild. Their own uniforms, while perhaps less practical, were adequate for current conditions. The mockery continued. Then winter came. The winter of 1944 to 1945 was one of the coldest on record in Western Europe. Temperatures dropped below 0 Fahrenheit. Snow fell in feet rather than inches, and suddenly uniform design went from aesthetic preference to survival necessity. German winter uniforms had been designed primarily for the Eastern Front. Heavy wool greatcoats, felt boots for extreme cold, fur-lined parkas for the deepest winter. But these items were in desperately short supply by late 1944. The Wehrmacht's logistics system was collapsing under Allied bombing and fuel shortages. Winter uniforms that existed were prioritized for the Eastern Front. Soldiers in the West made do with their standard wool uniforms and whatever additional layers they could scavenge. Obergefreiter Weber found himself in a foxhole in the Ardennes forest in December 1944, during what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The temperature was 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow was falling, and Weber was discovering that his German wool uniform, which had seemed so superior in appearance, was failing him in the most basic function, keeping him warm. The problem was wool's vulnerability to moisture. When wool gets wet from snow, rain, or sweat, it loses much of its insulating value, and in winter combat, staying dry was nearly impossible. You marched and sweated. Snow melted on your uniform from body heat. You took cover in snow-filled ditches. Within hours, Weber's wool uniform was damp, and damp wool in freezing temperatures is worse than useless. It actively draws heat from your body. His jackboots, the iconic German military footwear, were even worse. They were beautiful, tall leather boots that looked magnificent on parade, but they were also rigid, heavy, and offered poor insulation. The leather conducted cold directly to the foot. The inflexible design prevented proper blood circulation, and because they took so long to lace up, you couldn't easily remove them to change socks or check for frostbite. Weber's feet went numb on the second day of the offensive. By the third day, he couldn't feel his toes. By the fifth day, he knew he had frostbite but couldn't do anything about it, because removing his boots in freezing weather would be suicidal, and he had no dry socks to change into anyway. Then, on the sixth day, his unit overran an American supply dump that had been hastily abandoned during the German advance. Inside were crates of American winter gear, field jackets, wool trousers, thermal underwear, and boots, the same gear Weber had mocked 3 months earlier. He picked up an American jacket with hands that were blue with cold. Up close, the design made more sense. The cotton canvas outer shell was water-resistant. Snow and sleet beaded up and rolled off rather than soaking in. Underneath was a button-in wool liner that provided insulation while remaining removable for warmer conditions. The jacket had a hood that folded into the collar. The fit was looser than German jackets, which Weber had mocked as slovenly, but now he realized this allowed for layering without restricting movement. Most revolutionary were the American boots. They were completely different from jack boots, shorter, with rubber soles and designed in layers. The outer boot was leather, but lined with insulation. They laced up quickly with fewer eyelets. The rubber soles provided better traction than leather and insulated feet from frozen ground. Most importantly, they were designed to be worn with thick wool socks, with room for proper circulation. Weber stripped off his wet wool uniform and jackboots and put on American gear. The difference was immediate and profound. The American jacket, even without the liner, kept him warmer than his soaked wool uniform had. The boots, he could actually feel his toes again within an hour of wearing them. His feet stopped the constant aching that had become his baseline existence. "Mein Gott," he whispered to his squad mate, who was similarly changing into American gear. "They designed this for actual soldiers, not for parade grounds." His squad mate, pulling on American wool trousers, nodded. "Look at this," he said, showing Weber the construction. Double-layered at the knees and seat, reinforced where uniforms actually wear out. Our uniforms are tailored to look good. These are tailored to last. Word spread quickly through German units. American uniforms, previously mocked, were now desperately sought after. Soldiers who'd captured American gear kept it hidden from their officers, who theoretically would confiscate it as improper uniform usage. But as the winter deepened and German logistics failed to deliver winter clothing, even officers began looking the other way when their men wore American jackets under their German greatcoats. Lieutenant Müller, the company commander who'd noted the practicality of American design months earlier, ended up wearing a complete American uniform except for his German helmet and insignia. He justified it to his battalion commander as tactical necessity. But the truth was simpler. His men were suffering from cold injuries at alarming rates, and anything that kept them functional was acceptable. The boots became particularly prized. German medical officers noted a stark difference in frostbite rates between units that had captured American boots and those still wearing jackboots. The American design, which had seemed so unmilitary with its rubber soles and simple lacing, turned out to prevent cold injuries far better than the traditional German design. Stabsarzt Staff Dr. Friedrich Koch, medical officer for a regiment in the Ardennes, wrote in his report, "We are experiencing frostbite casualties at rates comparable to the Eastern Front, despite less extreme temperatures. The primary cause is inadequate footwear. The American boot design, examined from captured samples, shows superior understanding of cold weather physiology. The German jackboot, while aesthetically superior, is functionally inferior for winter combat. Recommend immediate adoption of American design principles." His recommendation went nowhere. Germany's manufacturing capacity was too degraded to produce new boot designs, even if anyone had been willing to abandon the traditional jackboot. But Koch's medical records told a clear story. Soldiers wearing captured American boots had frostbite rates 60% lower than those in jackboots. The practical superiority of American uniforms extended beyond cold weather gear. German soldiers discovered that American combat boots, with their rubber soles, were far better for extended marching than jackboots. The leather soles of jackboots wore out quickly, required constant maintenance, and provided poor traction on wet surfaces. American boots could march hundreds of miles with minimal care and still function properly. Feldwebel Otto Schneider, a veteran NCO, made the switch after a forced march in January 1945. His unit had to retreat 30 kilometers in one night, through snow and ice. Schneider wore his traditional jackboots for the first 10 kilometers, slipping constantly, his feet screaming with pain from blisters and cold. At a temporary position, he found American boots from a captured supply cache and changed. The difference was so stark that Schneider wrote about it in a letter to his brother, intercepted and never delivered. The Americans understand that soldiers are not parade ground ornaments. We march in boots designed to look impressive standing at attention. They march in boots designed for marching. After 30 kilometers, my feet thanked the Americans more than they've ever thanked our quartermasters. I hate that I'm writing this, but it's true. Their practical stupidity defeats our aesthetic wisdom. The superiority wasn't just in cold weather gear and boots. German soldiers discovered that American uniforms incorporated dozens of small design features that showed someone had actually talked to soldiers about what they needed. The American field jacket had large cargo pockets positioned where soldiers could actually reach them while wearing a cartridge belt and pack. German tunics had pockets, but they became inaccessible when wearing equipment. American trousers had reinforced knees and seat, the areas that wore out fastest. German trousers were uniformly constructed, requiring more frequent replacement. American helmets had a suspension system that kept the steel shell away from the head, providing better impact protection and making them more comfortable for extended wear. German helmets sat directly on the head with minimal padding. American webbing and equipment used quick-release clasps and simple buckles. German equipment used more secure but slower leather straps and metal buckles that could freeze in cold weather or become difficult to manipulate with cold fingers. Every small design choice reflected a philosophy: make the soldier's life easier, and he'll be more effective. The German philosophy had been different. A soldier endures hardship, and proper discipline means maintaining standards regardless of conditions. Comfort was suspect. It suggested softness, lack of martial virtue. But by early 1945, German soldiers had learned through bitter experience that comfort and effectiveness were linked, not opposed. A soldier with warm feet fought better than a soldier with frostbite. A soldier whose equipment was easy to use in the dark fought better than a soldier fumbling with frozen buckles. A soldier whose uniform kept him dry fought better than a soldier soaked and shivering. The American military had understood this from the beginning. Their uniform development process included actual field testing. Soldiers wore experimental uniforms in various conditions and provided feedback. Designs were iterated based on what worked, not what looked traditional or impressive. German uniform development had been based on tradition, aesthetics, and the assumption that soldiers would adapt to whatever they were given. The difference in approaches produced dramatically different results. By February 1945, it was common to see German soldiers wearing mixtures of German and American gear. an American field jacket with German trousers, American boots with a German greatcoat, German helmets over American wool sweaters. Officers officially disapproved but unofficially understood that their men were making rational survival choices. Some German units went further. After capturing American supply depots, entire squads would re-equip themselves with American uniforms, wearing German insignia and helmets to maintain identification, but otherwise dressing as Americans. The warmth and comfort were worth the theoretical disgrace of abandoning German military tradition. Oberst Hans von Witzleben, commanding a regiment, addressed this in a speech to his officers in March 1945. "I see our men wearing American uniforms. Some of you want me to punish this. I will not. We are losing this war not because our soldiers lack courage or discipline. We're losing because we lack resources, and one resource we lack is adequate winter clothing. If American uniforms keep our men in fighting condition, they will wear American uniforms. We can court-martial soldiers for improper dress after we've won the war. Right now, we need them alive and functional." His practical acceptance reflected a broader realization spreading through the Wehrmacht. German military tradition, for all its pride and history, had sometimes prioritized appearance over function. And in total war against an industrial enemy, function mattered more than appearance. The American uniform philosophy represented something deeper than just practical design. It represented a democratic approach to warfare, the idea that soldiers were valuable resources whose comfort and effectiveness mattered, rather than expendable instruments who should silently endure hardship. German military culture had emphasized the soldier's duty to endure. Cold, endure it. Uncomfortable gear, endure it. Inadequate supplies, endure it. Complaining was weakness. Discipline meant accepting hardship without protest. American military culture, by contrast, encouraged feedback. If gear didn't work, soldiers reported it. If uniforms were inadequate, changes were made. The military saw itself as serving soldiers as much as soldiers served the military. Comfort wasn't coddling, it was efficiency. This philosophical difference showed in countless small ways. American soldiers received regular new uniforms and boots. Worn equipment was replaced systematically. German soldiers wore the same uniform until it fell apart, then patched and repaired it, because replacements were scarce. American soldiers had access to laundry services that cleaned uniforms regularly. German soldiers washed their own uniforms when possible, but often wore dirty clothing for weeks because water and soap were unavailable. American soldiers were issued enough socks that they could change daily, keeping feet dry and preventing infections. German soldiers often had 1 or 2 pairs of socks, wearing them until they rotted off their feet. These weren't dramatic differences in weaponry or tactics. They were prosaic logistics and supply decisions. But they had profound effects on combat effectiveness. American units maintained higher readiness because their soldiers were healthier, more comfortable, and better equipped. German units saw effectiveness decline as soldiers suffered from preventable cold injuries, infections, and the grinding misery of inadequate gear. By April 1945, as Germany collapsed, captured American uniforms had become so common in Wehrmacht units that identification became problematic. Allied forces occasionally fired on German troops thinking they were American because of the uniforms they wore. German troops occasionally avoided fire from their own side because they looked American. In the chaos of surrender, many German soldiers simply kept their American uniforms. They were warmer, more practical, and less identifying than German uniforms that might mark them as enemies. Some walked into POW camps wearing American field jackets with German insignia sewn on. Others stripped off all insignia and hoped to blend in. In the post-war years, as military historians studied the campaigns, the uniform question became a small but telling example of American material superiority. It wasn't just that America produced more, it was that America produced better. Not more sophisticated, not more traditional, but better suited to actual combat conditions. German veterans reflecting on the war often mentioned uniforms as a small symbol of larger failures. "We looked magnificent in 1939, one veteran wrote in his memoirs. Sharp uniforms, polished boots, everything precise and perfect. The Americans looked sloppy and unmilitary. But by 1945, we looked like scarecrows and they still looked functional. That should have told us something about their system versus ours. The lesson was simple but profound. Form should follow function. Military tradition and aesthetic beauty matter far less than keeping soldiers alive and effective. A soldier who looks impressive but has frostbite is less valuable than a soldier who looks sloppy but can still fight. The American military had understood this from the beginning. Their uniforms were designed by people who asked soldiers what they needed, tested designs in real conditions, and iterated based on feedback. The result looked unmilitary by European standards but worked better than traditional designs. German military design had been based on tradition, on maintaining standards inherited from Frederick the Great and Bismarck. The result looked magnificent, but failed basic functional tests when subjected to modern warfare's demands. In 1965, 20 years after the war ended, a reunion was held in Munich for veterans of the Ardennes campaign. Former Obergefreiter Klaus Weber attended, now a civilian engineer. During the informal conversations, someone mentioned American equipment, and Weber told the story of capturing American uniforms in December 1944. "I laughed at that field jacket when I first saw it," Weber said. "It looked so plain, so unmilitary. I said Americans dressed their soldiers like factory workers, and I was right, they did, but factory workers stay warm and dry and comfortable while they work. Soldiers in parade ground uniforms freeze and suffer and die." The Americans understood something we didn't. War is work, not theatre. And they dressed their workers appropriately. He paused, remembering. "I wore that American jacket for the last 5 months of the war. It kept me alive through winter. It was still functional when I surrendered in May. My German greatcoat would have fallen apart or gotten me killed from cold. I owed my survival to American practicality, and I hated that, but it was true." Another veteran nodded. "I kept my American boots after the war. Wore them for years. Best boots I ever owned. When they finally wore out in 1953, I tried to find similar ones in Germany. Couldn't find anything comparable. We'd gone back to making traditional boots that looked good but hurt your feet. The Americans were still making boots designed for actually walking in." The conversation reflected a broader realization among German veterans. American material superiority wasn't just about quantity, it was about a completely different philosophy of military organization. Americans had industrialized warfare not just in production but in thinking, treating soldiers as components in a system that needed to function efficiently rather than as bearers of military tradition who should silently endure inadequate equipment. Did you know that modern military uniforms worldwide now follow American design principles rather than European military tradition? That the practical, functional approach, multiple pockets, layering systems, quick-release fasteners, comfort-focused design, has become universal, that even the German Bundeswehr abandoned the jackboot and adopted boots nearly identical to American designs. The German soldiers who mocked American uniforms learned what the generals learned about strategy, what the POWs learned about food. American pragmatism defeated German tradition because modern war rewarded function over form. You could have the most beautiful, most traditional, most historically significant uniform in the world, and it meant nothing if your feet froze off or your jacket soaked through in rain. The Americans understood something simple but revolutionary. Take care of your soldiers' basic needs, and they'll be more effective. Give them warm boots, dry jackets, comfortable gear, and they'll march farther, fight harder, and stay healthier. It seems obvious now, but in 1944 it was a radical departure from European military tradition. The German soldiers who risked court-martial to wear captured American uniforms were making a statement about more than just clothing. They were choosing function over tradition, comfort over appearance, survival over pride. And in that choice, they were acknowledging what their generals would eventually admit. The Americans had figured out how to wage modern war, and it didn't look like anything in the German military textbooks. It looked practical, unglamorous, and utterly effective. Sometimes the best uniform isn't the one that looks magnificent on parade. It's the one that keeps you alive when there's no parade, no tradition, no glory, just cold, wet, miserable survival. And in that contest, cotton canvas beat wool, rubber soles beat leather, and factory worker aesthetics beat Prussian military tradition every single time.